So, the final lecture for today, Peter Lehto from Finland, Turku, I believe. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Still bleeding edge of technology. This time it's user interface. So, Peter, please.
All right, thank you. So, welcome everyone to this final session today. Introductory session to Vaadin 7, which is a web framework for Java web development. And as I was already introduced, my name is Peter Lehto, and I work as a Vaadin expert and project manager with the Vaadin Ltd in Turku, Finland. So anyway, let's get started with the presentation. So we're going to go a little bit through what Vaadin framework actually is, why it exists, and why users should be interested in using that, and for example, what kind of benefits the framework provides for the web application developers. We will then, of course, also see how you can use Vaadin, what the key features of the framework are, and how you can actually come to the best outcome with Vaadin applications. We will also, if we have time, a little bit consider how Vaadin works internally and what the best practices and best ways of using the framework are. Vaadin 7 was unfortunately released a little bit late, and now new Vaadin version 7.2 is coming out, hopefully during the next month, and I'm hoping to also be able to a little bit discuss about the new features of 7.2. And of course, if we have time, we'll do the Q&A. If we don't, I'm of course glad to answer all the questions after the conference. So anyway, let's start with the question. What is Vaadin? Do we have any Vaadin users here with us today? There's one, there's two, few, okay. Maybe 5 to 10%. So introduction is then really in order. Before going there, I'm quite certain that not all of you knew that Vaadin is actually a Finnish word for a reindeer. That's quite strange. At least I have a job where I can say that I'm a reindeer expert. Well, I know nothing about reindeers myself, but if you consider the Vaadin logo, it's actually the horns of a reindeer, if you tilt it a little bit. And the logo itself, of course, symbolizes, well, maybe web application development and, for example, programming languages with the curly bracket. But, well, that's all details. So anyway, what's important is that Vaadin is user interface framework for building modern, rich internet applications. So why? Why yet another framework for Java developers in web environment? Why did the poor Finnish guys have to invent their own framework? Well, mainly to strive on developer productivity. And what this actually means is that Vaadin's idea and philosophy is to embrace Java over HTML and over traditional web technologies, which we like to think that are maybe on a lower abstraction level. And instead of that, we think that developers should concentrate on developing the actual business application to solve the business problem that they have, instead of fighting with web browser differences and, for example, JavaScript, AJAX communication, asynchronous, synchronous, or some data transfer formats. So instead of that, let developers really do the job that they're supposed to do and work with the business problem at hand. So how Vaadin then does that, or what is the way of Vaadin for doing that? And we have three main points. So server-driven rich internet applications, which are applications that run on server side on top of JVM, that allows you to use all the existing Java libraries, all the existing Java tooling, and just gain the benefits of server-side development. We also have rich component hierarchy, rich component compositions built together with the framework, and the developers can use these components just as if they were creating a Swing application, or just with the same desktop metaphor in which they've, at least a decade ago, used to work with. And of course, third point, embracing Java. So everything there is in Java should also be usable with Vaadin. And we don't want to hinder the Java usage just because we're running some applications with JavaScript, for example. So Vaadin is built on two key technologies. Vaadin has a servlet-based backend server, which you can run basically on any web server, starting from Jetty to Tomcat to, for example, the Wildfly. Then Vaadin's client side is running on top of Google Web Toolkit, or GWT, or GWT. And the idea with this is that we allow developers to stay on their comfort zone so they can actually do the backend with Java and they can do the front end with Java. And this is how Vaadin embraces Java programming language. So let's take a bit closer look into the rich internet application paradigm and how, for example, Vaadin sees it. So if we consider we have a client side and backend server side, and the idea is that any interaction with the application starts from the client side, where user interacts with the web browser, with the components inside the application, and this way mutates the actual application state. So when these kind of events occur, there is a Google Web Toolkit-based terminal adapter and the widget components which react to events the user does. These events get then sent to server side over an HTTP request, asynchronously and fully transparently without the users or the developers having to know details of that. And when the request arrives on server, it is received by the servlet container where the terminal adapter on server side routes the actual request to the correct application, to the correct user session, to the correct HTTP session, for example. What happens then is that as Vaadin server side is highly event-driven, the developers can write event listeners which mutate the state of the application on server side, maybe store some changes to database, update the status of the application model, and eventually change what is visible in the UI. So this way, all the control of the application, all the business logic stays securely on server side without having any JavaScript or any security holes of that kind, which would allow users, malicious users, to mutate and change the application logic. Well, we were on server where we mutated our view state, and we've sent the HTTP request, for which we then get an HTTP response that contains all the changes which occurred on server side. And this response is then again received by the terminal adapter of the client-side engine, which will interpret it and call the corresponding GWT widget APIs, meaning that the DOM structure of the web browser is then updated to reflect the status of the server side. So this is basically the server-driven rich internet application framework that Vaadin provides. Curiously, I would say that all this is handled by the framework, and developers are allowed to work with only the actual business problems they have in their business logic application. So, of course, this doesn't mean that Vaadin wouldn't allow developers to do changes on the client-side code, because that's just Google Web Toolkit, and you can, of course, have the control over that as well if you want. But on the high level, the programming model is quite strictly on server side. So let's take a bit closer look. As an example, we have two simple Vaadin UI components, a text field and a button. And we bundle the button with a click listener that has an implementation that displays a notification. And within the notification, we just greet the person who typed his name or whatever into the text field. What happens when user enters the application URL to his web browser is that we get initial content from the server that contains initial HTML, some CSS, some graphical assets for the theme, and the entire JavaScript library that is called widget set. So this is basically the client-side engine and all the rendering instructions of client-side widgets. And initially this is approximately 1.2 megabytes, but that can quite effectively be compressed to approximately 300 Ks. And if you use some reducing techniques, or the theme isn't, for example, that massive, you can end up all the way to approximately 150 Ks as well. So this is quite okay also for the mobile devices. What happens then is that user types his name into the text field and presses the greet button. At this point, a request is sent to server asynchronously that contains the information that user did on the client side. In server, we had our listener, which will now be invoked by the Vaadin framework, and the implementation of listener then dictates how the state on server is mutated. Well, we get back our response that now contains instructions that please show notification with this content, and it's less than 300 bytes. As an end result, Vaadin will mutate the DOM model of the browser and display the Hi Johannes notification. So I know that sounds fun and should be fun, but let's see if we can actually do that. So we have here really simple Vaadin application that looks something like this. The idea of the application is that we have provided some path from our server file system that contains Java docs, and we can browse these Java docs in web browser, and we can even edit the values, type something here, and the changes are propagated all the way to the actual disk system. So how would we create an application like this in Vaadin? I know this is a 30-minute speech, so I won't be spending, hopefully, too much time for that. But anyway, is the font size, by the way, okay? Can everyone see? All right. So initially, in our application, we had something called vertical split panel. And it was taking the entire space of the window we had in browser, and it was fully the content of the browser window. So we just say that we have our split panel as the content of the window, and we refresh our changes in our web browser, and we get the split panel into our application. Well, we had something a bit more there as well. So we had, for example, our table. And for our table, we will import it from the Vaadin package. And in our table, we say that it should also take the entire space available, and it should use some container as data source that contains our files. So from Vaadin core, we can give it file system container and point it to a file that is in my local machine's file system. So I'll just copy paste the file path from there. And doing some imports for the file. With this quite simple start, I can now say that split set the first component to be my table. Quite swing kind of way of writing applications. And actually with this one, I now have my table component displayed in the upper part of the split panel. Well, this is now containing only the top level things without, for example, the folder structure. So I can simply change table to tree table and give it the same container. And as an end result, I now have a table that actually supports hierarchical container structure, allowing me to see contents from my file system starting from the given file pointer. Well, I can't click on the table and don't really have the part that was showing it. So what I can do is that I just say table set selectable, true, and I also say that the table selection should be immediate. So this means that with these changes, I can now select an item from the table. Well, the selected item is still not shown anywhere, so what we're going to do about that is that we introduce a new component called label, say it's a content, and we want to display HTML content in it. So we say that content set content mode to be HTML, like this. And what happens with this is now that we want to display our label in our second component of the split panel, and we want to write an event listener that I was telling you about called value change listener into our table. And the value change listener itself does the following. So it'll update the value for the content based on what was selected from the table. And because the table is now using file system container, we can actually get the file from our table. So we'll just have to cast it to a file, and we get the value of the table. So this is invoked after the table item has been selected. And for this, I'll have to change my table to final, because this is an anonymous inner class. And what I do here is that I define a text file property, which is a way of Vaadin for saying that some data is bound from some property. So making a new text file property for the file and saying that the content, which is my label, should be, of course, final as well, but I just say that set property data source to be my property here. And I'll just have to copy my variable on the other side of the click listener. And now I did a change that the Java couldn't hot replace, so I'll just have to restart my server quickly. You could come around this, for example, with JRebel that has better hot swapping capabilities. So now what I've done this far is that I have a tree table, a content label, some click listener, and both are defined to be in my split panel. And if I now restart the application, what I should see is that when I click on an item here, I get the content into my label like this right away. And I can, of course, select items from the tree as well. Well, I can't just yet modify these, so what I'll do is that I will define a new layout, which is called vertical layout, and let's say that it's edit layout. And edit layout should take the whole size. Well, in my edit layout, I would like to have a new component called button that has caption edit. And the button has click listener. Just a second. So I have my edit button here. And the edit button, after I've imported it, I can add button click listener for the button. And what this click listener does is that I want it to open a new window. So I'll just say window to be a new window, and I say that it should have width of 500 pixels and also the height of 500 pixels. Then I want to say that window should be centered, and in my window I have a rich text area, which I call text editor. And my rich text area should show the content of the currently selected item from the table, which I already have in my content label. So I'm just saying that text editor, set property data source, content, get property data source. So we're using the same data source also for this one. Then I'm just saying that window should have the content of my rich text editor, and to my Vaadin UI, in which I'm currently working, I want to say that UI get current instance. So these are, for example, instances per browser tabs. And here I'm just saying that add window, which is now my editor window. And if I've gotten everything right this far, there are actually a few things that are still missing. So for example, the text editor should have size full. And getting back to my edit label here, so I added myself the button, but then I also want to add my content there. So another component is the content label that I'm adding here. And as a final result, I'm also saying that edit layout should have expand ratio for my content label to be 100%. And this is because I now have two components in my edit layout. Other one is the button, another one is the actual label. And I'm saying that the label should take the entire available space inside the layout after the button has been added. All right, then as a last step, I'm just going to say that the split should, instead of content, have second parameter of edit layout. And with this, if everything is in order, I should be able to show the content in here. I should be able to click on edit button, get the content on my window, and as this is a rich text area, I should be able to change the content, which gets then through the same property data source propagated all the way back to the actual component. And with the file system container and text file property, the changes to the file are actually written directly to the disk of the server system. So this is how you can, with approximately 96 to 100 lines, write a very simple Vaadin application that runs on server environment, but that is still executed on browser without any plugins and just with pure JavaScript. All right, getting forward with our topic. So, little look. Did you have a question? No, okay. So getting back to the topic and little discussion about the Vaadin architecture. So this is quite commonly the situation in web environments where we have some backend server hosting our backend system with some persistence and business logic, and we have our web server on top of that that hosts the UI. And this doesn't necessarily have to be the case because Vaadin can of course coexist, or the backend system can of course coexist on the web server as well. So we're just saying that we have some Vaadin UI and we have some backend server that, for example, contains our business beans, our EJBs, and we just inject them into our Vaadin application. What we have also on the server side is the Vaadin components and the actual Vaadin application UIs. So these can be executed on servlet environment or in portals in portlet environment as well. So you can have, for example, live array portlets with Vaadin UIs. And with the components, we can have whatever add-ons from Vaadin directory, or they can be company internally built own components based on the need of the business application. This is all happening on server side, but we also have our client side in our web browser, which contains the server-side component counterparts, which are called widgets. And the widgets are now the Google Web Toolkit or GWT widgets that are running as a JavaScript inside the browser. And Vaadin routes the communication between the server and client side automatically with asynchronous AJAX requests. And the transport format is actually JSON. Well, as we are now working on a browser side or on the client side, we have our DOM structure, and that we can theme with whatever CSS theme we want to apply for it. So meaning that we can actually create any kind of a look and feel for an application without being restricted to some predefined UI components of, for example, some other frameworks that require plugins to be executed on browsers. And since Vaadin 7, as we are using the Google Web Toolkit, we can of course just define our widgets on client side and use them without the server backend, meaning that the UI can also be defined in the web browser, but in that case you will have to implement all the backend services for the server communication by yourself. So there are plenty of options to do this. This is a little bit more in-depth diagram of what actually happens with the Vaadin communication. So on server side, we have our component, which has some state that the server persists for the user session. And this state is actually serialized over the communication mechanism to client-side connector that is a JavaScript component, which will get the state changes from the server and invoke the widget API from the GWT widgets. So with this way, you can virtually connect any existing GWT widget to Vaadin backend just by providing it a connector, some state model, and the server-side component implementation. And when, for example, I click on a button in my Vaadin UI, what happens is that RPC method is invoked. A request is sent to server that simply tells that this particular function was now called, this method should be called, and from that the server will then route the actual communication back to the click listener or value change listener or whatever the case was with the implementation within our business application. So getting back to our house, we have rich components which we can categorize into three different categories. First of them being the actual user interface. So Vaadin comes with more than 40 built-in core components that you already saw in the demonstration. All of these have the same rather simplest API, and they are quite easy to use. All these components are guaranteed to work in any modern desktop browser system, starting from IE8 all the way to IE11, and also tablets and phones, smartphones like iPhones and Android platform is supported. And Vaadin will also, with new TouchKit 4, add support for Windows phones and Windows devices and tablet environment as well. If that's not enough, you can, of course, use our directory service that contains more than approximately 400 community contributions to Vaadin. So basically all the active Vaadin users who have been willing to give out their own component implementations have submitted the components into Vaadin directory service. Data source of Vaadin is quite database table-like, so we have properties which are basically typed values, we have items which you could consider being database tables, and we have containers which contain multiple items being the instances of a database table per se. Containers can have different implementations like ordered, filtered, hierarchical, whatever, and these interfaces can be implemented in such many ways that I'm not going to, of course, go through all of these, but for example, JPA container that will automatically persist data into JPA system, some Hibernate specific container implementation, Eclipse Link, or all the way to the Google App Engine, so whatever. And as a theme, Vaadin comes with 3 different built-in themes, out of which the reindeer, surprise, surprise, is the default one. It has few different color schemes, and for example, quite easy ways to customize the theme. Then another option is to use Chameleon theme, for which we even have a tool on our website that allows users to define their own colors, their own fonts, and download the modified theme for their Vaadin application to use. Then Vaadin 7 also supports somewhat newish thing called syntactically awesome style sheets, so SAS. So this is basically a way with more higher level functions define CSS, and Vaadin will convert this SCSS code into CSS, which is then transported as part of the Vaadin theme for the actual client browser. Of course, 13 was embracing Java, so as we are running on top of JVM, you can virtually run and write Vaadin applications with any JVM compatible language. And we, for example, have rather great add-on for Scala that is called Scaladin and allows basically wrapping Vaadin API for Scala, developing Vaadin applications with Scala, just like writing native Scala basically. We also, of course, support all the major IDEs and build and deployment tools. And as we are Quit compatible, it means that Vaadin actually contains the entire Quit project, meaning that for Quit users, Vaadin works actually as a drop-in replacement, if so wanted. And of course, Quit is used on the client side of Vaadin. And maybe the most important point is that server side is optimized for developer productivity, whereas the client side with Quit is optimized for control. So developers are, of course, encouraged to also do modifications on client side, write their own components, and just allow them to better control the DOM structure that is shown in the browser. I believe we are running out of time, 2 minutes. So really quickly, a few new features of Vaadin 7.2. So there is officially roadmapped date that beta release should be out within Q1, but they specifically said to me that don't make any promises. So I'm not making any promises. Anyway, what is new is that there will be a new data component called grid. So you already saw table and tree table, and those work with relatively small sets of data, but grid is designed completely from the start to support large data sets and also work as pure client-side widget without the server backend if so wanted. And this will also give us new data API for client-side so that the actual implementation can be anything else than the server-side container model as well. Grid is actually based on low-level escalator widget, which is heavily optimized for the rendering performance. And this is the key point of the new grid component. Then little smaller features, but still very much requested, are, for example, the frozen columns and variable sizes for row and column sizes of the table component. Well, then you can have components in headers and footers as well, and of course the new implementation is very clean and extensible. So before users wanted to make some changes to the Vaadin table, what they had to do was actually that they copy-pasted the entire client and server-side code just to be able to create their simple change. But with Grid, we of course have redesigned everything, and the extension model is of course much more object-oriented, so no more copy-pasting code. There will also be a new theme in Vaadin that is highly customizable with the SAS variables, and with that you can actually quite effortlessly also change other things than just color and fonts. What is maybe interesting is that the new theme will support responsive layouts, meaning that without server round trips, different breakpoints can be set for the theme, which change the look and feel of the theme based on the browser window size or the device resolution that is currently using the application. So this means that you don't have to have separate views implemented for different devices, but instead the theme can just make the look and feel different based on the actual resolution that is available. Well, TestBench 4 allow you to basically unit test Vaadin applications in such a way that they are automatically executed in browser, and the new thing there is a thing called Vaadin driver that allows you much more cleanly to actually interact with specific UI elements. I think that at this point I'll have to skip a bit ahead and just really quickly tell you that you can start Vaadin development really easily with Eclipse. Just download the Vaadin plugin from Eclipse Marketplace. IntelliJ already comes with built-in support for Vaadin, so just create a new Vaadin project. And NetBeans also has a plugin support nowadays. You can, of course, start new Vaadin projects also with Maven archetypes. And in vaadin.com/tutorial, you have really simple layout and data binding tutorial that allows you to construct an address book application. You can, of course, download the book of Vaadin, which is approximately 600 pages from vaadin.com. You can get it as a PDF or HTML version, whatever you prefer. And of course, vaadin.com/forum contains really lively and active forum on which we have more than 100,000 posts already. dzone also provides 3 to 4 page long reference cards which give you a kickstart for the Vaadin application development. All right, thank you for your time, and we'll probably take the questions afterwards.
What is the future of Vaadin regardless to GVT is now open source and you are...
Yes, Vaadin is actually, as a company, part of the GWT steering group. So nowadays Vaadin has a bit of say in the future of GVT as well.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Hello. What are your plans regarding closures in Java 8?
That's
Do you have
actually
any?
a good question. Those plans are not really clear at the moment because those also involve some Java to JavaScript compilation with GVT. So that's mainly to do with the future of GVT as well as how Vaadin will support Java 8. But of course, as those will be the mainstream ways of doing web development also in the future, they will definitely be part of Vaadin in some way.
Is it possible to use Twitter Bootstrap with Vaadin, or?
Yes, actually, there is a website called User Voice, and that same feature has been requested on User Voice multiple times. So I hope that will also be part of Vaadin at some point in future. Yes.
Will you be integrating WebSockets for alternative way of communication?
Yes, actually, I didn't mention that Vaadin 7.1 already supports push mechanism out of the box. So you can just annotate your Vaadin UI with push annotation, and the implementation is actually based on Atmosphere. So with that, you get automatic WebSockets, and actually Vaadin 7.2 will implement as a fallback method the long calling.
Okay, since no more questions, Peter, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.